Chicago, 1871. A young city, but with ambitions larger than the prairie winds that swept in from Lake Michigan. Here, railroads met waterways, and fortunes could be built almost overnight. Chicago was more than a place on the map. It was becoming the beating heart of a rapidly industrializing America. The city's population had exploded in just a few decades, climbing to nearly 300,000 people. And still they came, waves of immigrants from Ireland, Germany, Scandinavia, and beyond. Each carried their hopes and hardships, chasing what they believed was the American dream. By day, the streets rattled with the sound of horse-drawn wagons rolling over wooden planks. Shopkeepers leaned out from their doors, calling to customers. Children spun hoops and laughed in dusty alleys, their voices carried away on the crisp autumn air. Workers in overalls and flat caps filled saloons after long shifts in lumber yards and slaughterhouses. Chicago was alive, loud, proud, bursting with energy. But beneath that energy hid a dangerous truth. The city had been built almost entirely of wood. Houses, sidewalks, even some streets, all flammable, all waiting for a single spark. Chicago, the proud city of commerce and dreams, was in fact a giant tinderbox. October 8th, 1871. It was a Sunday evening. The air was dry, unnaturally dry. For weeks, not a drop of rain had fallen. Wooden sidewalks cracked underfoot. Roof shingles curled in the heat of the sun. The city was parched, fragile, waiting. And then came the wind. Strong, restless gusts off the prairie whipped through the streets, rattling shutters, carrying with them an invisible warning. Chicago had become, as one observer later said, a giant box of matches waiting for a strike. On the city's southwest side, in a modest Irish neighborhood, stood the small barn of the O'Leary family. In later years, the legend would grow. A cow, startled in the night, kicking over a kerosene lantern. Was it true? No one could ever say for certain. But what mattered wasn't the cause. What mattered was the spark. Inside that wooden barn, amid hay and timber, a single flame took hold. At first, it was nothing more than a flicker, the kind of fire that might lick the edge of a haystack and burn itself out. But that night, the flame found everything it needed: dry timber, fierce winds, a city unprepared. Neighbors rushed to help, but within minutes, the fire had leapt from barn wall to rooftop, carried by sparks that the wind scattered like stars across the dark sky. What began as a whisper in the O'Leary barn was about to roar like a living beast. Chicago, city of wood and dreams, was stepping into the darkest hours of its short, brilliant life. The fire did not stay small for long. Fed by the wind, it leapt from rooftop to rooftop, devouring houses as if they were kindling. Sparks soared high, carried for blocks, igniting new blazes before firefighters could even arrive. Within hours, entire neighborhoods were engulfed. Families poured into the streets, clutching what little they could carry: a cradle, a quilt, a family Bible. Mothers held children close, fathers dragged buckets of water, desperate and helpless. The air itself turned to fire. Chicago's fire department, valiant but overwhelmed, stood no chance. Their horse-drawn engines could not keep pace. The water pressure dropped so low that hoses sputtered weakly, spraying more steam than water. One firefighter would later write, "We might as well have tried to spit it out." And still the wind blew. From Lake Michigan, gusts fanned the inferno, transforming sparks into firestorms. Wooden bridges across the Chicago River caught and burned, collapsing beneath fleeing crowds. Even the river itself could not stop the flames. The fire jumped it, not once, but twice. Above the city, the night sky glowed an angry red, as if the heavens themselves were aflame. Witnesses said the roar and the fire was like a freight train, deafening, relentless. Church bells clanged frantically, their toll swallowed by the thunder of collapsing buildings. By dawn, Chicago was no longer fighting a fire. It was, as one witness described, a storm of flame, a hurricane of fire that no mortal hand could resist. Chicago, the proud young city of trade, industry, and dreams, had become hell on earth. By the time the fire was finally spent, Chicago had changed forever. The morning of October 10th came not with the soft light of dawn, but with a heavy, choking gray. The sun, obscured by smoke and ash, cast an eerie pall over the city. Where once stood rows of brick buildings, wooden houses, and bustling markets, now there was nothing but ruins. Chicago, the proud city of progress, was no more. It had been reduced to a vast, empty wasteland. 17,500 buildings, homes, stores, offices had been turned to smoldering rubble. Entire neighborhoods vanished, their outlines only visible in the charred skeletons of chimneys and the twisted remains of streetcars. The once thriving downtown was little more than a heap of blackened debris, with only a few half-standing walls to mark where a thriving city had stood just days before.
Among the wreckage, survivors began to emerge, shocked, dazed, and broken. They had fled with little more than the clothes on their backs, some with nothing at all. As they stood amidst the ashes of their homes, the grief was palpable. The human toll was devastating. More than 100,000 people were left homeless. Entire families had been torn apart. And though the official death toll was estimated at 300, many believed the number was far higher, as the fire had claimed the lives of many who had been forgotten, whose names would never be recorded. In the silence of the smoldering ruins, the weight of the tragedy was felt on every corner. Chicago had been a thriving metropolis just days before, but now it was a graveyard of what was and what could have been. But even in the face of such destruction, the city began to rise again. It was a city of immigrants, a city of survivors, and they would not be defeated so easily. Out of the devastation, something new would be born. A phoenix would rise from the ashes. Within weeks, relief efforts began to pour in. Money, food, and supplies were sent from all corners of the country, from neighboring cities, from those who had seen Chicago's suffering and could not turn away. But it wasn't just charity that rebuilt the city. It was vision. The fire had destroyed much, but it had also cleared the way for something greater. The building codes were changed. No longer would the city be allowed to burn again in the same way. Chicago would rebuild stronger, brick and stone, steel and glass. Architects and engineers began drawing up plans for a modern city, one that would stand tall and sturdy, impervious to the flames that had ravaged it. Chicago's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. In the years that followed, the city became a symbol of American resilience. Within a few decades, the skyline would begin to rise. The first skyscrapers would pierce the sky, marking Chicago as a center of innovation and modern architecture. The city's economy, shattered by the fire, began to recover even more quickly. The steel, rail, and manufacturing industries boomed. By the 1880s, Chicago had not only recovered, but had become a hub of industry and commerce, attracting even more people, more immigrants, and more businesses eager to stake their claim in this reborn city. Chicago, from the ashes of disaster, would become a global symbol of American strength, reinvention, and determination. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 left behind devastation on a scale few could comprehend. Nearly 17,000 buildings gone, over $200 million in property damage, a staggering sum worth billions in today's economy. 100,000 men, women, and children homeless. For many, it felt like the end of the city, but in truth, it was only the beginning. Chicago did not die in the flames. Instead, it was reborn. Within days, relief poured in from across the nation and beyond. Donations arrived from New York, St. Louis, even London. The Chicago Relief and Aid Society distributed food, clothing, and shelter, helping survivors through the harsh winter that followed. But survival was only the first step. The fire had cleared the canvas, and what rose from the ashes would astonish the world. The rebuilding brought opportunity. New building codes demanded sturdier materials: brick, stone, iron, and soon steel. Architects seized the chance to experiment. Engineers dreamed of new heights. Out of necessity, innovation was born. By the 1880s, the ruins had given way to factories, warehouses, and office towers. And then something no one had ever seen before: the skyscraper. Chicago's new skyline reached towards the heavens, a declaration that the city had not only survived, but had transformed itself into the future. Economically, the fire had paradoxical effects. In the short term, losses were crushing. Yet in the long term, the destruction fueled unprecedented growth. The demand for materials, steel, glass, stone, created a construction boom. Banks and insurers, forced to adapt, modernized their practices. And by 1890, less than 20 years after the fire, Chicago's population had surged past 1 million residents, making it the fastest-growing city in the United States. But the fire also left scars. The poor and immigrant communities bore the brunt of the suffering. Many never received enough aid, while the rich and powerful rebuilt quickly, stronger than before. Inequality, already present, was etched deeper into the city's fabric. Still, from this crucible of fire, Chicago forged a new identity. It became a city of steel and glass, a laboratory for architecture, a hub of industry, and a symbol of resilience. The fire that could have destroyed it instead gave it strength. The Great Chicago Fire was more than a disaster. It was a turning point. In the ashes of October 1871, Chicago discovered not only the fragility of wood and wind, but also the unyielding strength of human spirit. It rose again, taller, stronger, bolder, earning its place as one of America's great cities. Chicago's story reminds us all, from devastation, there can be rebirth. From ruin, there can be resilience. From fire, there can rise a city of steel and dreams. And so, the city that once burned to the ground became a beacon to the world, a testament that even in our darkest hours, the flame of hope can never be extinguished.